Billions were being whispered about in private rooms, and none of it was flowing through the traditional channels of women's tennis. Brands weren't just pursuing Alexandra Eala, they were quietly repositioning entire marketing budgets around her. A 19-year-old from the Philippines had become commercially magnetic in a way that forced executives to reconsider decades of sports business assumptions. This wasn't about Grand Slam trophies or a no-one ranking. It wasn't built on statistical dominance. It was powered by something far more disruptive to established systems: authentic, uncontrollable cultural magnetism. When the financial projections began circulating among insiders, the reaction across the tennis world wasn't loud outrage, it was silence. The kind of silence that follows the realization that a power shift is already underway. What was unfolding wasn't a typical endorsement surge, it was a structural recalibration. A quiet corporate revolution unfolding in real time. And the WTA did not anticipate how quickly the ground beneath it was moving. By the time the broader public began noticing, the transformation had already advanced several stages beyond speculation. To understand the magnitude of this moment, you have to recognize a specific type of athlete, the rare individual who transcends the sport before the sport fully embraces them. Muhammad Ali did it by redefining what athletic voice could mean. Serena Williams did it by stretching the boundaries of excellence, identity, and global influence. Now, whether institutions feel comfortable admitting it or not, Alexandra Eala is stepping into a similar commercial orbit. Born in the Philippines and refined through elite European training at the Rafael Nadal Academy in Majorca, she carries a narrative that marketing strategists struggle to artificially manufacture. Her story crosses continents. It connects Southeast Asia's rising consumer class with European tennis tradition and a global youth audience fluent in digital culture. That fusion created something rare, a perfect convergence of geography, ambition, relatability, and elite performance credibility. Long before rankings fully reflected her competitive ascent, corporate analysts were already studying her audience metrics. Her social media engagement wasn't simply strong for a tennis prospect. It rivaled established global athletes across disciplines. Brands weren't measuring follower counts alone. They were analyzing depth of interaction, repeat engagement, audience retention, regional market growth, and emotional resonance indicators. The results startled them. Sportswear conglomerates saw penetration into Southeast Asian markets that traditional tennis sponsorship models struggled to reach. Technology firms identified brand affinity metrics rarely achieved through standard tour partnerships. Telecommunications giants with aggressive expansion strategies across emerging economies recognized something unmistakable. She wasn't just an athlete, she was a cultural access point. And crucially, conversations about monetizing that access weren't routing through centralized tour sponsorship frameworks. They were happening directly with her representation. That distinction reshaped everything. For decades, the WTA's commercial engine relied on a collective value proposition. Corporate partners aligned with the tour itself, gaining visibility across tournaments, broadcasts, and player appearances within a shared structure. It was stable, predictable, effective for its time, but it was designed in an era when institutional platforms controlled access to audiences. Social media and direct-to-fan ecosystems altered that equation permanently. Eala's personal digital gravity began exceeding segments of the institutional voice promoting her. Sponsors recognized that emotional loyalty to her brand identity was stronger than general affiliation with the tour, so they adjusted strategy. Instead of asking how she could fit into existing tour-aligned campaigns, they began designing customized ecosystems around her. Multi-year ambassador structures, co-created digital content ventures, equity-aligned collaborations. Long-term narrative building that positioned her not just as an endorser but as a media property. Sports business analysts privately described it as bypass acceleration. Not rebellion, not hostility, simply efficiency. If a specific athlete generates measurable, loyal engagement at scale, brands will follow that concentration of value. Inside tennis circles, the implications sparked quiet anxiety. Agents representing other players began hearing subtle shifts in language during renewal discussions. Budget allocations were being reassessed. Strategic priorities were being refined. Those words sound neutral. In corporate language, they signal redirection. The money wasn't leaving women's tennis, it was concentrating, flowing toward the strongest magnetic center, and that center had a name. Name attached to a backhand capable of freezing rallies, and a presence capable of mobilizing millions across continents within hours. The striking part of this transition was its organic nature. There was no public campaign positioning her against the establishment, no calculated antagonism. Her team responded to extraordinary demand with rational business structuring. That's standard practice in every mature industry, yet the outcome exposed a vulnerability within the broader ecosystem. When one athlete's individual commercial value begins rivaling or surpassing institutional equity, leverage shifts. Other players feel the downstream effect. Mid-rank professionals depend disproportionately on a healthy collective sponsorship pool. Smaller tournaments rely heavily on corporate renewals to sustain prize funds and operational standards. When sponsors reallocate substantial portions of investment toward individualized partnerships outside centralized agreements, the shared infrastructure experiences strain. Sports economists have observed similar patterns in other leagues. When star power dramatically outpaces organizational adaptation, the middle tier often absorbs the pressure. The situation was not about blame, it was about structural readiness. Had the WTA modernized its commercial architecture quickly enough to accommodate a player whose audience connection existed independently of tour scaffolding? Or was it still operating within models optimized for pre-digital media dynamics? As reports of escalating endorsement figures circulated through sports business networks, industry observers began projecting multi-year portfolio valuations reaching levels typically reserved for established Grand Slam champions. These were not modest emerging player deals. They were transformative commitments structured for longevity. Telecommunications leaders with deep Southeast Asian penetration were rumored frontrunners. Global apparel brands evaluated her as a generational ambassador. Technology companies viewed her as a credible bridge into youth-driven emerging markets. And in every scenario, negotiations centered on her narrative authority, not tour alignment. Behind closed doors, WTA executives faced uncomfortable strategic questions. How does a governing body maintain sponsorship indispensability when a single athlete can independently deliver hyper-engaged communities across multiple growth markets? How do you preserve collective leverage when corporate return on investment models increasingly favor direct creator-style partnerships? Silence in that context becomes more than absence. It becomes signal. At precisely the moment when narrative framing was essential, institutional messaging remained restrained. In modern media ecosystems, vacuums do not remain empty. Journalists, analysts, and fans fill them instantly. Interpretations solidify quickly. And the interpretation forming globally suggested an organization struggling to keep pace with transformation visible for years in digital analytics. Every day without assertive strategic articulation compounded perception risk. Sponsors accustomed to proactive, adaptive partners noticed. And perception, in high-stakes commercial environments, influences capital flow. By the time the broader tennis audience fully recognized what was happening, financial recalibration was already well underway. Renewal discussions slowed. Option clauses quietly expired. Long-standing partnerships entered evaluation phases without automatic extension. The movement was subtle, procedural, almost polite, but beneath the vocabulary of strategic reassessment, the reality was unmistakable. Capital migrates toward measurable value. Eala had become that value concentration point. The most pressing question now circulating through boardrooms wasn't whether she deserved the offers. That part was rarely contested. The deeper, more destabilizing question was whether the WTA had already surrendered narrative control over the commercial future of women's tennis. And if so, what would it take to reclaim it before the shift became permanent? The next chapter would not unfold through financial spreadsheets alone. It would emerge through words. And when those words finally came from Eala herself, the reaction would exceed every projection anyone had quietly modeled. The moment did not arrive with shouting. It arrived with composure. In a carefully conducted interview that began circulating across digital platforms with startling velocity, Alexandra Eala addressed the commercial storm surrounding her name in a tone so measured that it amplified every syllable. She did not accuse. She did not posture. She did not frame herself as a victim or a rebel. Instead, she articulated something far more powerful: clarity. She spoke about responsibility, about understanding that her rise represented more than individual ambition. She acknowledged the millions of young athletes across the Philippines and Southeast Asia who saw possibility reflected in her journey. She discussed gratitude for the structures that allowed her to compete professionally, while also recognizing that those same structures were built in a different era, with different assumptions about how value is created and distributed. Then, she delivered the sentence that shifted the temperature of the entire conversation. She explained, calmly and precisely, that professional women's tennis had not been designed with athletes like her in mind, athletes whose commercial resonance is driven as much by cross-cultural identity and digital intimacy as by ranking position. The clip spread instantly. Sports media amplified it within hours. Marketing publications dissected it with fascination. Fan communities across Manila, Jakarta, Bangkok, and beyond treated it like a declaration of recognition. It wasn't confrontational. That was the striking part. There was no hostility embedded in her words. She wasn't demanding special treatment. She was naming a structural reality. And once named publicly, it became impossible to ignore. The WTA faced a narrative dilemma. Engaging too aggressively risked appearing defensive. Remaining quiet risked confirming the perception that the organization lacked strategic agility. When an official response eventually surfaced, it emphasized commitment to collective growth and long-term sustainability. The language was polished, institutional, carefully balanced. But observers noticed what it did not include. It did not meaningfully address the structural point she had raised. It did not outline concrete modernization plans. It did not articulate a forward-looking commercial framework designed to harmonize extraordinary individual value with collective stability. In contrast, Eala returned to training sessions and match preparation with visible focus. That composure became part of the story. Brands study temperament as carefully as performance statistics. In high-volatility environments, emotional discipline signals longevity. Her restraint reinforced the perception that she was not orchestrating disruption. She was simply navigating opportunity responsibly. Meanwhile, the sponsorship migration continued at a pace difficult to disguise. Corporations rarely announce withdrawals with dramatic headlines. They describe shifts as strategic rebalancing, portfolio optimization, market-specific targeting, yet beneath those phrases capital moved. Established tour partners reduced activation scope. Renewal negotiations extended longer than usual. New investment flowed toward individualized campaigns built around direct audience access. Smaller tournaments felt pressure first. Events that depend heavily on sponsorship revenue rather than broadcast contracts faced tighter operational margins. Prize money discussions grew more delicate. Mid-ranked players, the competitive core sustaining week-to-week tour vitality, encountered an environment less financially predictable than before. None of this was Eala's intention, but structural economics rarely concern themselves with intention. Sports economists analyzing the situation identified a familiar pattern seen in other professional leagues. When a single athlete's personal brand equity expands faster than institutional adaptation, revenue asymmetry intensifies. Star concentration accelerates. The middle tier experiences volatility. Long-term stability depends on whether governance evolves quickly enough to integrate the shift rather than resist it. The critical variable was no longer her endorsement total. It was institutional response speed. The WTA's leadership operated within a complex matrix balancing players, tournaments, broadcasters, and global partners across jurisdictions. Deliberation is often a strength in such systems, but transformation driven by digital culture moves faster than committee cycles. Sponsors accustomed to agile collaboration evaluate responsiveness as a proxy for future reliability. Each day without visible modernization strategy subtly influenced perception. At the same time, Eala's audience continued expanding. Engagement metrics climbed. Regional loyalty deepened. Youth demographics displayed sustained interaction rather than temporary viral spikes. Technology firms saw her as a credible ambassador for emerging consumer ecosystems. Apparel companies explored long-term storytelling arcs rather than seasonal campaigns. Telecommunications leaders valued her ability to humanize expansion narratives across Southeast Asia's rapidly digitizing markets. The more composed she remained publicly, the more confident corporate partners felt privately. A paradox emerged. The athlete at the center of the turbulence projected stability. The institution historically responsible for stability appeared uncertain. That contrast sharpened commentary across sports journalism. Analysts asked whether this was merely a transitional phase or evidence of a permanent recalibration in how women's tennis monetizes global attention. Some veteran players, speaking anonymously, expressed frustration, not toward Eala, but toward governance inertia. They had invested years building the collective brand. Watching commercial gravity tilt so dramatically exposed how fragile institutional leverage can become if adaptation lags behind cultural momentum. Others saw opportunity. If commercial frameworks evolve to accommodate hybrid models, where individual magnetism and collective infrastructure reinforce rather than cannibalize one another, the sport could emerge stronger than before. But that required decisive innovation, revenue-sharing adjustments, flexible sponsorship layering, digital-first partnership integration, transparent communication with players about long-term economic architecture. None of those reforms happen automatically. They require acknowledgement of the problem's scale. The broader public debate intensified. Was it fair for one athlete to command extraordinary resources while others faced tightening conditions? Market logic answered one way. Collective ethics prompted deeper reflection. Eala herself refused to engage in divisive framing. In subsequent appearances, she reiterated commitment to the sport as a whole. She emphasized gratitude. She highlighted the importance of opportunity pathways for future generations. That rhetorical discipline further strengthened her brand credibility. Corporations prefer ambassadors who elevate rather than fracture communities. Meanwhile, viewership data revealed something equally important. Interest in women's tennis spiked in regions historically underrepresented in global ratings. Philippine engagement surged dramatically. Southeast Asian digital consumption patterns indicated sustained appetite rather than short-lived hype. The commercial surge around her name was not extracting value from the sport, it was expanding geographic reach. The challenge lay in ensuring the expanded reach translated into collective benefit. That is where governance mattered most. The pivotal question no longer concerned endorsement totals, it concerned architecture. Could the WTA reimagine itself as a platform enabling superstar-level individuality, while preserving economic resilience for its broader membership? Or would it cling to legacy frameworks optimized for an era before athletes cultivated independent global ecosystems? History across industries suggests that institutions willing to evolve alongside transformative figures often thrive. Those that resist or underestimate them risk gradual marginalization. Eala did not declare war, she did not demand structural upheaval, she simply articulated reality and continued competing. Yet reality, once clearly expressed, exerts pressure. Sponsors follow engagement, audiences follow authenticity, capital follows measurable resonance. The numbers were not speculative projections anymore, they were active flows, and women's tennis stood at a crossroads. One path led toward integration, innovative commercial models aligning superstar magnetism with shared prosperity. The other path led toward fragmentation, where extraordinary individuals flourish independently while collective systems struggle to maintain equilibrium. The outcome would depend not on viral clips or trending hashtags, but on executive decisions made quietly in the months ahead. What began as a sponsorship surge had evolved into a referendum on modernization. The sport would never revert to its previous equilibrium. The only remaining uncertainty was whether leadership would shape the new era proactively or react to it incrementally. One truth was undeniable. A teenager from the Philippines had accelerated a global conversation about value, identity, and power within professional tennis. And regardless of institutional comfort levels, that conversation had already changed the future.